All right, YouTube, welcome to 1980 in more ways than one. I think there's certainly enough overlap at this point to say history's kind of repeating itself. We got a incoming president who's really more of a celebrity figure, kind of like a Reaganite figure, minus maybe the worst aspects of neoconservatism. We've got basically a celebrity president who's not well received. We got to remember, if you go back, like lionized Ronald Reagan was rather poorly received by a lot of people in Europe and around the world. They thought he was going to start the final war, number one, and it could happen. Honestly, in all honesty, they thought he was a warmonger. They thought he was, a shithead, actually, and dumb, not well spoken at all. If you look back, the Gipper was not actually that coherent when he delivered speeches, unless they were completely scripted. If he spoke off the cuff, other than making a couple of funny jokes, for the most part he was standard and poor, to use the economic term, when it came to public speaking. I think sometimes people forget that fact. They also forget Reagan and Trump, about the same age, taking office. So it can work. We've seen it before. Reagan did not destroy the country. Definitely a divisive figure. I don't lionize him. I don't consider him to be a great president. I consider him to be the last president who was acceptable in his quality. He and Jimmy Carter were acceptable individuals. Carter more honest, Reagan more astute, more understanding about the world. Since then, we've had a slew. Herbert Walker, failure. Bubba Bill, failure. W, failure. Obama, failure. We've had 4 failures in a row, basically. Bubba Bill stands out as at least he reigned over a period of time where the private market was doing well. Other than that, things generally weren't. And so Reagan gets kind of unfairly lionized by the right, even as he gets unfairly lambasted by the left. No, he was the last average president that we've had. He seems stellar because he's being compared to the last 4 dumbasses that we've suffered under. So let that rest, I suppose, is an issue for now. But it is 1980 today. We're back in the Cold War. The 70s were a period of thawing out of relations too. Jimmy Carter had led SALT talks and so forth. He was seen as a pacifistic figure, sort of an Obama-esque figure on certain aspects of foreign policy. Now, Obama is a warmonger. He's droned tens of thousands of people. It's just a silent war, but his fans see him as more pacifistic. More inclined to use sanctions as opposed to direct military intervention. And during that period, during this period though, oddly enough, Obama reigned over the freezing of relations with Russia, applied sanctions, took us back to the Cold War. When the 80s happened, that was the height of the Cold War. Some people think of, the Cuban Missile Crisis or something. Yeah, there were certainly problems then, but in the 1980s it reached a fever pitch. In the 1980s, it was basically, yeah, we're amping up to have a nuclear war. Russia's churning out nuclear weapons. There are fucking problems all over the world. We even see the primordial counterpart, really, under the Mujahideen and so forth, rearing its ugly head. Sort of the precursor to all the terrorists that are running around now. It's worse now, though, than it was then. There was a fixation on Middle Eastern conflicts, a fixation upon Russian espionage and things like that. Synthetic music and weird styles were everywhere. We see that coming back. Well, I've almost started listening to the modern pop station again because I've noticed even the hip-hop now is so infused with what could be said to be like synthwave riffs and stuff like that that it's almost retro music at this point. I heard another like modern pop song yesterday, and it sounded like it had like the old 8-bit tracking backing on it or something like that. It's remarkable how much it is like early 80s music. There's almost a post-punk feel to some of the modern rock too, to the point at which, yeah, modern music, after, a decade or more of being basically, to me, unlistenable, from like the end of the 90s through maybe the mid-2010s, like 2015, almost everything on the modern radio station to me was unlistenable. Yeah, there was Gautier, and that was basically the one, somebody I used to know. That song was only listenable because it was like retro 80s, even credited, I think, Peter Gabriel as an influence. Other than that, there wasn't a whole lot of music worth listening to. TV was crap. Now it's sort of going back to where it was in 1980, honestly, when you think about it. And I like it. I think it's great. It's going to be refreshing because when we were at the height of the Cold War, people were so socially alienated and so fucked up thinking the world was going to end that they sort of just lost it mentally. And so there was a lot of experimentation within culture, within music, and everything else. So I hope we go back to that. I hope like the new romantic style comes back and stuff. I'm already prepared, you know. I like sort of the 80s rock style and stuff like that. Maybe we'll get like, maybe Ozzy will start making more hard rock again too. You know, sort of Ozzy in his coked up period when it wasn't quite metal in all ways. It was a little weirder than that because he was just constantly snorting coke and he was all bloated and fucked up and he was basically, he went crazy. He was crazier than he was when he was in the 1970s when Black Sabbath was being founded. It's going to be good if that actually happens, and I think it will. We've been sort of aiming towards it anyway. We already had like the next wave hippie movement in the mid-2000s. I can remember with like Zeitgeist and stuff like that, all the anti-war rhetoric about 10 years ago. That would be roughly about the same time period between sort of the hippie trippy days and the dawn of the 80s. We've got a magnate president celebrity. We've got the return of synthetic music. We've got the sort of dying embers of postmodernism and the rise of a new young right. We've got literally everything in place that we had at the dawn of the 1980s. And I think it's great. Maybe we'll have watchable TV. Maybe the Muppets will come back. Hell, that'd be better than 90% of the crap they're making now, too. Be great to have like a retro society. You even see it with like Vaporwave and stuff, which starts as sort of, you got to realize, even with the 80s, a lot of the earlier, like the late 70s material that informed that entire span of time was a critique of capitalism. It was a critique of what became the 80s. It was never meant to say, oh, well, this is the way we should go. Yeah, we need atomic social alienation and wanton capitalism and the me generation sort of stuff. It was actually totally opposed to that. But because of the way the sound and the style operated, that critique became the dominant culture. It got completely, like the Kraftwerks and stuff, that sort of imagery got completely usurped and turned into a whole subculture. It infiltrated movies, it infiltrated music, it infiltrated art, it infiltrated everything in sort of that sleek, new romantic / new wave / everything is synthetic and computerized and with neon lights sort of feel. Actually became what people wanted. It became desirable because it was cool. It started off as a bad satire of culture and became the culture itself. I hope it fucking happens again. That's the kind of world I'd like to live in, because I've spent my entire life almost looking back at the 1980s, where I was born in 88, so I didn't really get to experience the 1980s myself. I said, well, if you had the 1980s but modern internet access, it'd be a perfect world, basically. It'd be so awesome. And we might actually get to have that now because of internet culture and everything else. So we're back at 1980 right now. Great. It's going to be a lot better than what we've been through. The 70s were sort of this sullen, almost dark period, and we've been now for the last decade through the same counterpart. You know, back then you had the recession, oil shocks. Now we have the recession. We have quite literally oil shocks in the mid-2000s. Everything was the same throughout those periods. Anti-war rhetoric, anti-war rhetoric. Question the establishment, question the establishment. Now people have made, on the left, peace with the establishment. They become like Walter Mondale. So I think, by the way, Trump will win re-election if he runs again. I think it's going to be a similar setup to how Reagan curb-stomped the Democratic Party back then. That's what I think. By the way, if history continues to repeat itself, this means whoever comes after Trump, Pence or whoever, will run, they'll win on Trump's successes, and they'll make a mockery of the Republican Party, and then you'll get another Bubba. Which means we'll go through another boom period like the 90s. Government won't be sensible, it won't be sane, it'll be a reaction to the Trumpite era, but at the same time, the private systems will go along just fine. And if you can see where history overlaps, you can't perfectly predict the future, but you can predict generalities. fairly accurately. This is what I've been doing in politics anyway. I saw the overlap with past eras, and I said, oh yeah, Trump's got the advantage here. It was more than that, but that's the basic fundamental. That's why I started. It was the fundamental basis to what was going on. Once it was clear it wasn't a joke candidacy. The other possibility, honestly, was somebody like Ted Cruz. That was the other possibility there. He quickly fell short, and it looked like we might get like a coke-snorting Rubio or something. That would be like a Lance Vance presidency or something like that, honestly. Some little derpy dude in a suit who's obviously on drugs from Miami, no less. Yeah, that could work in sort of that 1980s feel. That would have been okay too, but Clinton was never a possibility. That'd be a return to the 90s. You can't skip a whole decade. So welcome to 1980. The link in the description to Killing Joke's very good song on that subject. Yeah, that's basically what we're going to go through. Music's going to get better, I think. Culture is going to get better in general. Things are going to be a hell of a lot better than they were for the last decade. So, welcome to 1980. That's about all. Peace out.